Hi everyone, welcome to Learn Python. In this tutorial, we will talk about functions. The concepts which we are covering in these tutorials like control structures, functions, and we will go through data structure and maybe classes and other object-oriented programming concepts also. These concepts are applicable to all the programming languages. Here we are looking at the Python implementation, but the concepts remain same. Whatever programming language you are going to learn, the concepts are going to be same. There would be just syntactical differences between different programming languages. So first question is, what are functions? Why do we need those functions? Let's talk about that. Functions are basically the block of code which perform a specific task, a given task, and we use function when we want to do something repetitively. So if we want to do the same task multiple times, instead of doing the same task multiple times manually, we create a function and then we can use that function whenever we want to perform that task. It would be more clear when we will be looking at some examples. We can also understand it intuitively by looking at this picture here. So here is a microwave, which is a machine, and how it works is we give some input to microwave, we give some raw material, and we set some program here for baking, cooking, reheating, whatever we want to do with that material here, and microwave performs that particular task. We have given the instruction, we have given the input, microwave has to perform the task whenever we give that particular instruction, right? And we get some output. So we need to decide what instruction to give, we need to decide what input to be processed, and accordingly we will get some output. And obviously if we give different inputs, we will get different outputs, and if we set different programs, we will get different outputs. Here we can see in the images. And once you understand the basics of function, you will be able to see that you can add functions, and your understanding of control structure, what you have done, for loops, if else, while, all those sort of things to perform complicated tasks. Like we see when we bake a cake, we also use other instruments, we also use other ingredients to decorate the cake or maybe to prepare something else. The output is not the cake which is simply baked. So similarly, when you will start coding, with time you will see that you need to perform a task. For that you need to combine all these skills. So are you ready to learn function? We will start our discussion with simple functions implementation in Python, and as we will move forward, I will show you some examples how you can combine functions with control structures, how you can combine functions, control structure, and break, continue, pass statement. So probably I will give you just one or two examples for that. Rest you need to practice. Let's look at this file in Python. So basically functions are of two types. One is inbuilt function and another is user defined function. So inbuilt functions means any functions which we have used so far. Like if you just want to find out maximum value of a list of elements, you know what is the list? We have talked about list. So we have this list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if I just use max function, which is an inbuilt Python function, I will be getting the maximum element from this list. And similarly, we can use another function. For example, if we want to find out minimum of a list of elements, we use min function. So these are inbuilt function of Python. We have not defined, these are inbuilt in Python. And in each and every programming language, each and every tool you use, there are some inbuilt functions which you can use. For example, this ABS gives you absolute value of any number. So this is -7 is a negative number and the output is 7. And we have also talked about these functions when we had discussed typecasting. For example, 34 is an integer and we want to typecast it to string data type. So we have used str. Str is again a function, and we have also talked about the function type. So if I just put it inside type, I will get type of string of 34, which should be string obviously. And these are the functions which we have used. These are the standard function. Also, in any programming language, we have some modules or libraries or framework which we can use. For example, in Python, if you want to take a square root of a function, there is an inbuilt function sqrt which gives you a square root of a number, but that function is not in base Python, that is in a particular module. So in R, if you are coming from R, you might have used some libraries to use a particular function. In Python also there are so many libraries, and here I am using the library math. So whenever you want to use a particular library or module to use some of its function, first of all, you need to import that library. And if the library is installed on your system, then you can use import library name to import that library, and then you can use its function. We will talk about libraries, how you can use them in great detail in later video. But as of now, I'm just importing this library math because it's installed already, and I'm calling a function from this library. In Python, whenever you want to call a function from a particular module or a library, you need to address it like this. First of all, the library name dot and the function name which you want to use, and then you put here 45, so it will give you square root of 45. And you can check it for another values also. So if you do it for 49, you will get 7. There are other ways also to import the libraries. We will talk about that later. Now, we will talk about user-defined functions, means how we can define our own functions, because sometimes the inbuilt function are not enough for us. We need some more functions. So how we can define that? So we will talk about these things. In this tutorial, we are starting with how we can write simple functions. So to write any function, first of all, we need to write the keyword def for definition, right? In R, there is something like function. After the def keyword, you need to give your function a meaningful name. So here I'm just giving it a name, test1 or any name. But ideally, when we are doing something, we need to give a name which is meaningful name. For example, I just say hi instead. So this is the name of this function. Then colon, as we have done in for loop and if else also. After that, when I hit enter, you see the code is intended. So you need to take care the code should be intended after that. And here you need to type whatever you want to do, the task which you want to perform. Suppose I just want to print something. I just want to print hi. So because hi is string, I'm putting it in quotation marks. If I run this, nothing happens because I have created a function which performs the task of printing a string hi, but I have not yet called the function. If I want to use this function, I need to call this function. And how we call the function? To call the function, we need to just write the name of the function, and obviously with these parentheses, if I run the code now, it prints hi. So whatever I write here, it will print because I have just asked it to print. This was one very simple function. Similarly, we can do some numerical calculation or some complicated operation. Let's look at another example. Here what I am doing is I am creating another function, and this function is, if I just write it, give it a name x, it will still work, but we should try to give some meaningful name, right? So here I am just giving it a name func1. In func1, what I am doing is I am creating a variable x equal to 5. You know variable assignment, we have talked about it earlier. So we have created a variable x equal to 5. But notice this variable I am creating inside the function. So this is a local variable. We will talk about this. This becomes a local variable because this value of x is available only inside the function, right? Now I have given this, and what I want to do, I just want to print x. Whatever is x, I just want to print. These functions are not useful, but I am taking step-by-step approach so that you understand writing simple functions. Now I need to call this function. So to call this function, again I need to do func1 and run this chunk. I get 5. If I change the value of x to some string, I will get that string here because I am asking it to print whatever is the value of x, right? Similarly, you can also do some computation here. So for example, instead of just doing printing something, I want to do x equal to 5. And I want to do some computation. For example, I am just assigning another variable y, which is 2 times x plus 5. Any computation I am just writing randomly. And now I want to print y. So can I do that? Let's see what happens if I print the value of y. I get the value of y, which is 10 plus 5, which is 15. So this is how we define function. And if we try to print the values of both x and y, we can use x comma y, and it is printing both the values. But it's not clear what we are printing, so we can use some strings here. For example, I just write x colon, this is a string, x colon space, this is a string, this is the value of x. Here I am writing in the quotation marks y colon space, and I need to put comma, because when we print multiple values, we need to separate those values inside print statement by using commas. So I'm using commas here. So basically it is a string, it is a number, it is a string, it is a number. See if it works. It has printed nicely. X is 5, y is 15. So if you want to do something with the formatting of a string, you can always do. We will see in separate video how to do string formatting to make it more readable and to make it more reusable. So this is how we define functions. Now let's talk about argument of this function. As of now, in this function func1, you see that I have used this parenthesis here, but I have not put anything inside the parenthesis. It means this function takes no argument, right? This function by default will define the value of x and y, do these computation and give us the result, but it is not taking any input, right? And if we want to give input to our function, as we have seen in the microwave example, we give some raw input to the microwave, we set some program, and then the output comes after the program finishes, right? If we want to define some inputs, how we can do that is, so suppose I am defining func2 to give some input. Here we can write f. If I just write s, it will take one input, right? If I want to give multiple inputs, I can use those inputs separated by comma. So it will take the value of x, and what I want it to do is, I want it to perform x to the power 5. So how we can do that in Python? X, and for raising to the power 5, I need to use double star and 5. And this is the function. It will take some value of x. Now I need to call this function. So to call this function, I need to use the function name, which is func2. And you see, func is the function name, but I need to give one input, because the function which we have defined, func2, is taking one input. If I don't give any input to this, I will get an error. If I give more than one input to it, I will get an error. You can see here, func2 is missing one required positional argument x. So the error is very clear. We can understand it's a type error, that one positional argument is missing. We will talk about positional argument later, but we understand that one argument is needed, which we have not given here, right? So suppose I give here 2. So what it will do, it will take x equal to 2 and 2 raised power 5, so it will give us 32. So 32 is the result. And if I want to do the same computation for another number, for example 8, it will do 8 raised power 5. So this is the number. So you see the utility of creating a function. Whenever you want to perform the operation of raised to the power of 5, you don't need to do the computation every time. You can just call this function every time and it will do the job, right? And it is such a small function. We will see more complicated function, and it becomes handy to use those functions instead of doing these things multiple times. Now let's see, can I give two outputs to this function? No, because it just take one input. It just take one input, and I'm trying to give two inputs. So again, I'm getting type error. Func2 takes one positional argument, but two were given. So it's very clear. As you are learning programming, try to learn to understand the errors and how to handle those errors. We will talk about handling the errors and debugging and printing those things later on, but at least try to see what error you are getting and try to understand what has gone wrong and how you can handle that. So we got to know that yes, we have given two inputs, we should just have given one input. So this was one input function. Now I ask you one question. Suppose you want to do the same operation for this listed number. I have a list of numbers here, and in the list I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you want to do it for all the numbers. How can you do that? You want to do the same operation for all these numbers. Can you think? Pause the video, do your efforts, and if you can't see, then you can continue watching the video. If you want to do the task for all the numbers, you can use for loops. So how you will be using for loops? Let me insert new code chunk here. You can use for. First, let me define it here to make it more readable. For, you can write I in num, so it will iterate for all the elements of the number, and here you can use func2. If you have already defined, or otherwise because it's a one-liner function, you can directly write the operation also. So for all the numbers, you are getting this result. 1 raised power 5 is 1, 2 raised power 5 is 32, 3 raised power 5 is 243, and so on. And for one linear function, of course, you can write here like this also, I raised power 5. Oops, we need to use print statement, otherwise it will not print the results. Yeah, same result. So later we will see more efficient approach for doing the similar task, but this is how I am showing you how you can combine functions and for loops, right? Now let's look at another example where you have two arguments. So what I am doing is I am just copying this function. I am trying to extend the same function. I want to create a new function. I am giving it a name func3, which takes two arguments x and n. Okay. And what I want to perform? I want to perform x raised power n. So basically here whatever power I want to do, I want to make it a variable. Instead of just raising it to power 5, I want to make it a variable so that I can choose what power I want to compute, right? And when I call this function, I need to use name func3, and this time I need to give two arguments. If I try to give one argument, again I will get the same error that one positional argument is missing. It also tells the name of the argument which is missing, right? So let me just give input, two inputs here. For example, you see I need to do 2 raised power 5. I say comma 5. It is 32. If I need to do 3 raised to 5, I can change just one input here. I get 243, which was here. If I need to do 2 raised power 7, I will get 128. It is here. Yeah. So I can change both the values. So I have two variables now here and I can change both the values to get the result. These were a few simple examples where we have created the function. Another thing is when I'm giving two arguments, how does Python know which one is which? It takes in that order. The first one it will take as x. The second one it will take as n, if you have not defined it explicitly. Otherwise, you need to define explicitly x equal to this, y equal to this. Usually in functions, we have so many arguments and we can't remember order of those arguments. So we call them by their name also. We will talk about this in the next tutorial. Here, I just want to show you one more thing, that we can also define the functions with some default values. So how we can do that is, let me just add few more code cells. So how we can do that is, suppose this was my function func2. I am creating another function, suppose func4. Now in func4, what change I am doing is, it takes one input, but here I am giving some default value to this input. So my default value is suppose 2. What does it mean is, if I just call this func1 without any input, then to this function will work this time. It will not throw an error. Usually it takes one input and if we call without any input, we get an error. But because we have defined some default value, it will not throw an error. It will take x as 2 and it will do the job, right? You see we get 2 raised power 5, which is 32 here. So we don't need to give the input here. We can skip giving the value, and these things are important when you do use some libraries, and there are some functions in which they use some default parameters or hyperparameters for machine learning algorithms or data cleaning things. So the standard things they put at default value, so you don't need to define all the parameters, right? But if you want, you can always change the value. For example, if I want to change the value of x, I can simply write here 4. So it will do now 4 raised power 5, which is 1024, right? So if you want, you can change. If you don't want, then to it is fine. Similarly, you can see the same logic in this example where we have two input values and you can give default values to one of these or both of these. For example, if you define x equal to 2 and n you have not defined. Now when you run func3 with just one argument, okay, we get an error. Non-default argument follows the default argument. Okay. So first of all, we should have non-default arguments, and those arguments which have some default value should come at last. Let's see if it works. Yeah, so we get 2 raised power 7, which is 128. We had seen that. And if we just call it func3 with two values, This time I want to do 3, comma 5. What it will do? This time, because I have changed the order, it will take n equal to 3, x equal to 5. So it will perform 5 raised power 3, which is 125. Let's check that. Yes, we are getting the output. And we can always give the default values to another inputs also. So if I am doing this, now I can call this function without giving any input. So it will just perform 2 raised power 5 and we get 32. And now again we can give the values to input if we want to. In this case, when we give just one value, so it will again take 7 as the value of n because it's in that order, right? And for x, it will take the default value 2. If we want, we can give both the values, of course, and we can do the computation, whatever we want to do. So it will perform 5 raised power 7. So it's time for a quick summary. In this tutorial, we have talked about what are functions, why do we need those. We have talked about inbuilt functions and user-defined functions. We have talked about not these things, but let me summarize what we have talked about. Continue our discussion on functions. It will take 3-4 more videos to discuss all these topics in functions. So keep watching the videos. If you are having trouble in some of the topic, you can look for my previous videos in the same playlist. So we have talked about user-defined function and how we define function in Python. We use def keyword. Here we need to give some name to the function. So whatever name is suitable. For example, you are computing a square root, so give the name which resembles a square root. Although square root is a function available in Python math module, but whatever computation you are doing, try to give some meaningful name so that later you can understand what this function does. After the function name, we always put parenthesis, right? As of now, I am putting the parenthesis empty. Here we put colon. So this kind of structure is very common in Python. We have seen this structure in control structure also. Then we hit enter and most of the time IID automatically indent our code and we get here. So here we write the statement or the task which we want to do. So whatever we want Python to execute, we write the statement here. It can be one single statement, it can be multiple statement having some computation, and finally it can have return statement or print statement. We will talk about this also in the next tutorial. So for example, we are printing some result or we are returning something, so we write something here, right? And this is just the function which we have created. When we run this code, nothing happens. To be able to use this function, we need to call this function. And how we call this function? We just call it by its name. So whatever name you have defined here, you need to use that name, the parenthesis, and you will be able to run this function. Now this was the example in which we have not used any argument. But if you want to use a function with argument, then what you need to do here is you need to give here some input. Input can be one or more than one. So for example, if you define def and some function name here, and here you write input, here you write colon, and again here you do some task whatever you want to do, and then you call this function name. But when you call this function, you need to make sure that you give exactly as many inputs as you have put inside the definition of the function. So if you have used one input, you need to give one input. If you have used 5 input, you need to give exactly 5 input. Then you will be able to see the function executed. Another thing is you can also set some of the inputs to their default values and it becomes very useful. So for example, in this function I just have 2 inputs. We can have multiple inputs and I want to give default values to some of the inputs. Then I need to make sure that I write the input parameters in the order that the parameters with no default values comes first and parameters with default values comes here. So I can give here some default value, whatever I want to give, right? So I need to make sure that here we have parameters with no default and here we have parameters with default values. And then we can call this function by using lesser arguments means those arguments for which we don't have any default values. And these arguments we can skip because they already have some default value. Let me show you one example. Let me show you one example. Here is the example of read CSV function from Pandas library. If you have used that or if you have heard about that library, and don't worry if you have not yet used that library, but I just want to show you that this is the library. To use this library, we need to install this, we need to import this. We will talk about these things later. This is the function which we want to use. So suppose read underscore table is the function. I was talking about CSV. Anyways, these are the similar function. So these are all the arguments. We need to give some file path, we need to give the separator, delimiter. These are all the arguments. And many arguments don't have any default values, right? But some of the arguments have some default values. For example, skip blank lines equal to true. So this argument have some default values here. So if we don't define, by default, it will take this value to be true. This day first, it is false. And keep date column, it is false by default. Compression infer, it is the default value. So some of the parameters will have default values. So in the libraries, we have all these complicated functions and many arguments are having default values. So when we write the function, we can also give default values to some of the things which we want. And if we want, we can always change this to whatever available options are there. For example, in this function, they have defined what all options are available, how you can change the default values if you want to. Don't get scared by looking at these things. That's enough for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will talk about positional argument, keyword argument, print and return, and many other things which are related to functions. Keep watching the videos. And in case you are finding these kittens, you can also add some fun to your programming. How you can do that? You can watch my Colab tips videos for that. Thank you for watching.